Welcome to The Backstory, a podcast from the North Dakota News Cooperative that takes an in-depth look at the stories we're reporting for you. I'm Sabrina Halverson, CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. Joining me is Michael Standaert, our lead reporter. This week's story was headlined, New Food Guidelines Take a Bite Out of Public Schools. And this really takes a deep look at what our kids are eating in schools and what our schools are able to feed our kids. And there are a lot of guidelines and rules and regulations that schools have to follow. And you really got into all of that. So Michael, tell me a little bit about, first off, how did you even come up with this story?
So I often follow kind of just food issues in general, food and environmental type things. And I had seen, a lot of national coverage on RFK Jr.'s, MAHA, Make America Healthy Again type policies and activities. And I'd seen some national coverage of the guidelines when they came out in January, and there was another announcement just in the last week or two where RFK and Rollins from USDA, they had Mike Tyson there, they had all these other celebrities and people talking about eating real food, getting away from processed foods. And I think it's just a very interesting subject, and I was curious about, okay, what's the policy here? How does the USDA food for schools policies trickle down to a state like North Dakota, and then how do people implement that? So basically, I went and interviewed the director of school nutrition for the state, and then a few of the school nutrition directors in different public schools. One in Bismarck here, which is a larger public school system, and then also in Lisbon in the east. So it's kind of more out of curiosity. It's like, okay, there's all these different food guidelines every 5 years. They update them. They've done that since 1980. I think this new one that's just come out is the 10th one. So the most recent policies that have trickled down to schools were implemented with the ninth version of that, which has more things about reducing sugar and sodium and adding more whole grains to meals. And these things, don't just impact K through 12 schools, but they, any agency or facility or, military, childcare, hospitals, these things who receive some kind of federal assistance for meals has to follow the guidelines, and they're required to follow, what comes down through the FDA and USDA policies. So it's pretty complex and intricate, and it's pretty complex and intricate for the individual school systems to figure out as well. So I mean, for example, it's like they'll have to calculate out their whole menu for the week and see the total calories for that week, but they'll also need to break it down per day. And then through that, they'll also need to figure out, with the new guidelines that are being implemented now, how to keep total calories in that week to 10%, only 10% coming from sugars, and with all the processed foods and things that we've, come to know and love and hate over the last 40 years or so, there's a lot of hidden sugars in those things, a lot of other enzymes and stabilizers and things like that they're trying to reduce. So it becomes very complicated for individual school systems to try to figure out their menu and also meet these requirements, and they have to meet the requirements in order to get the funding to help pay for it. So I basically just thought it was interesting to look into these things. I don't think many people really know, kind of what goes into it.
Yeah, there was a lot that I did not know in reading this story. And a lot of it, it's really interesting. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, there's a quote in here, and it mentions that a lot of the products that our kids are eating in schools are different from what you would buy at the grocery store. And so this quote is, if you see Trix or Cocoa Puffs in a school, that is a specially formulated cereal for the school. So when they go on to explain it, that's not the same thing that you would buy at the grocery store. Even a Ritz cracker, it says. In the school, it's a whole grain, whereas in the grocery store, it's not. So even it makes it even more confusing, because now we're talking about, Trix, who, I don't want to talk down on Trix, but we're not going to say Trix are healthy, but apparently they're healthier in the schools than what you would buy at the grocery stores?
Well, they're healthier considering, I guess, added whole grains instead of, processed white flour or something like that. So, because of these guidelines and the changes that take place every time there's a new guideline developed, the manufacturers have had to, pivot and make sure they meet those guidelines in order to sell to schools. One person had mentioned that there comes a point where those manufacturers are not necessarily going to want to pivot so much anymore. But it just becomes very difficult for them to do that. One of the biggest issues, so the newest guidelines that were just released in January basically upend the food pyramid that we've been that's been in place, basically since the 90s. I mean, I remember back in the 80s, they kept saying, 4-4-3-2. I think that's the formula for me and you. That was kind of one of the early
Yeah.
versions of this. But then in the 90s, it really shifted to a very high carbohydrate pyramid. So that like the base of it, the biggest portion was like 6 to 11 servings of carbohydrates, which is quite a bit. And all these discussions around the Make America Healthy Again, it's like, okay, we've gotten too much into carbohydrates, and there should be a shift back to healthy fats, and that's a debated thing too. And then more protein as well. So, if that's the end goal and that's what they want to do, and maybe the science is starting to back that up as far as kind of metabolic health, that's going to be difficult to do because it's like turning around this ship,
Yeah.
in mid-course that's been loaded down with all this cargo over the last 40 years. How do you do that, quickly and without burdening school systems with cost, and then also, bringing in new equipment, whether it's, bigger freezers to hold what ground beef or something like that, or bigger fridges to hold, fresh produce. The school systems aren't really set up for that now because the whole diet system had moved to these heavily processed foods, which are convenient and cheaper and quick to make. I mean, you have, 15, 20 minutes to feed 400 kids, in shifts at an elementary school or something like that. It's difficult to have somebody come in and cook up a big meal every day
Right.
when a lot of these places don't have many staff, they don't have a big kitchen, they don't have the freezer or fridge capacity. So, okay, some people would like to see these things happen, and, eating a kind of essentially like a home cooked meal cooked from scratch, is definitely healthier than processed food. So, how do you do that, and how do you pay for it is the big question going forward. I think,
Yeah.
some school systems would definitely want to do this, but yeah, where's the money going to come from to do it is the big question.
Right, exactly. Like you said, I mean, it can be hard enough when we're talking about just a family of four or five, but you were talking about 400 kids that all have to be fed within a certain amount of time. Where do you store all that fresh food if we're going to be feeding them fresh food, and who's going to cook it? There was an example in your article here about if we're making potatoes, mashed potatoes, instead of using the dehydrated potatoes, we want to use real potatoes. Well, who's going to peel them and boil them and cook them? I mean,
Yep.
that's
Labor
that
intensive, and
yeah,
yeah,
and
cooking from scratch is definitely labor intensive. And yeah, you'll need to pay those people. You'll need to beef up staff. You'll need to beef up equipment and have bigger kitchens in your schools.
right.
So, will this, I didn't really talk to anybody about this, but it just makes me think, will this lead to consolidation of some smaller schools into bigger schools and that sort of thing? If that's the case, I mean, I know here in Bismarck, the school nutrition director said they're looking at possibly having a kind of a centralized kitchen, and then they'll deliver out during the day to the schools. So yeah,
Yeah.
those are the questions, going forward. That something like that could potentially help with efficiency and cutting in labor costs, but then you also have the driving costs and the delivery costs too. So,
Yeah. And if we're
who,
talking
who,
about moving that much food, do we need refrigerated trucks, or we need, to keep it warm? Yeah. I mean,
yep.
it's a great idea. We all want our kids to be eating healthy, and we all want to be following science. And if the science is telling us, we maybe need to adjust our thinking on healthy food, great. But putting it into action is so hard for our schools.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's going to be a difficult process. I mean, so like the current guidelines that are being implemented right now are basically with sugar and sodium. There's some milk ones. I didn't really get into that in the article as much. There's a shift to allow more whole milk. And then I think 2% skim. I think they have to have whole milk and 2% skim milk now. And then but then when you look into so part of that, you also, if you look into the calories per week and calories per day, so once you add that in, that kind of shifts things too. So, whole milk would have a lot more calories, and it's okay, how do you, and more protein, that's, probably good and stuff too, but it's like, how do they shift all that? And I didn't put this in the article either, but one of the ladies was saying that she had placed all these like little pieces out on the floor to try to figure out how her menu can work. And there's also a guideline related to colors of vegetables per week. So it's like you have to have an orange vegetable, you have to have a green vegetable, red,
Mm.
like five, kinds throughout the week. And that you can have them, on multiple days if you want, but you have to at least have those five spread through the week. So, there has to be kind of a easier, less complicated way to do some of these things. I mean, I was like asking, and again, I didn't get into this in the article. It's like, well, can you have kind of a mess hall type thing where it's like, okay, you just have this main selection and then another option. I mean, that could potentially be, people did say it could be potentially be something, but we've grown so accustomed to having a lot of choices
Yeah.
that they still want to provide as many choices as possible. So it'll be up to, counties and states and, whoever to figure out, how to fit in with those guidelines and pay for it too. So
I'm going to sound like a grumpy old person here, but back in my day, I remember when we would go through the school lunch line and you had whatever the main course was and you had whatever side dish vegetable there was and maybe some applesauce and a milk. There were no
yep,
choices and that's what you had or you didn't eat or you brought your lunch. But the school lunches have gotten to where there's a lot more options for the kids. They're also taking into account more, food allergies and things like that as well these days. So I can only imagine. I mean, when my kids were at home, it was hard enough for me just feeding two kids every day. Feeding 200, 400 kids every day and having to follow all of these guidelines, that's tough. And we've talked a lot in North Dakota over the last year or so about paying for school lunches
yep.
and providing free meals and things. But there hasn't been a bigger discussion on this article that you did on
Mm.
what actually goes into all of these food choices and the regulations and things that our schools have to take into consideration. I had no idea that it was so
Complex.
much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and kind of looking at the free school meals thing too, I did speak with people about this, but I didn't really get into it in the article because it would have kind of
Yeah.
it would have gone down a rabbit hole. So, part of that is, okay, these things are going to get more expensive. So are people going to be willing to pay for more for school meals? On the other hand, many of the nutrition directors are saying, for a lot of these kids, this is the most healthy meal they're going to get
Yeah.
during the
True.
day. Their parents may be giving them heavily processed food at home. And another aspect of that is like, okay, so maybe you do a mess hall type lunch. The participation level is probably going to drop a lot, and schools rely on that kind of a steady flow of money so they can plan on, for their food system and things like that. Would that reduce the amount of students that use it? That, could potentially be something as well because, okay, maybe they're not used to this type of food or they just don't like it or that sort of thing. So, and other things came up, I mean, that didn't make it into the article. There's always a lot of things you talk about that don't make into the stories. It's like, oh, in some high schools, you're having kids, DoorDash food to the school at lunch. And
Oh,
then, some parents are complaining about the price of school lunch, and then they're allowing the kids to DoorDash, 12, $15 lunches. So
wow.
I don't know.
Wow, the world we live in.
Yeah, it's extremely complicated, and health ends up being kind of individual choice, but you do want to try to provide the healthiest option you can. So yeah, I don't know how they're going to deal with it going forward. It's going to be interesting to watch.
It
And for
is.
like something like, so that, like some of the schools have been starting, I hear this more and more. They're getting some of the ground beef or some beef from local ranchers and things like that around the state to prepare that and like fry it, to brown it, you would need a grease trapper,
Mm.
and to meet the health and safety guidelines. There's not many school, particularly, smaller schools that would have something like that. So
Yeah.
otherwise, if they're given it, they can kind of almost boil it, but then it's kind of just this gray hamburger, which usually is not as appetizing as nicely seared ground beef. So
Right.
I'm making myself hungry now.
I know I
But
haven't eaten lunch yet either. But I do
but
not want a boiled hamburger.
no.
But
But so those are some of the little things that you just don't really hear about, and you just don't know until you start kind of asking around. Okay, how do you deal with the situation? What's your situation now? And
yeah, that's a
I
good
find it
point.
very just very interesting.
We talked about the staff and what it would take and how much it would cost and everything, but also, like you mentioned, you'd have to have more industrial equipment because we're not talking about small kitchens. We're talking about industrial kitchens, and industrial equipment is so expensive. And I can see how many of our schools just are not able to pay for that kind of thing. So it's a very complex situation, and it's one that I'm really happy that you looked into because it's something we should be talking about more. And it really goes along with, the conversation we have about who pays for the meals, but also we
Mm.
need to be talking about how healthy are these meals and how can we help our schools provide them. So
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, you would probably need more industrial type kitchen, even kind of chefs in
yeah,
a way. And I don't know how much the people at the top think about it when they're talking about either, putting through these policies, or whether it's paying for meals, or changing the guidelines in a certain way. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the next several years.
yeah. So, and my last question is, every time we have a change like this in the national guidelines, the schools have to go through all of this and change what they're doing again?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't changed. It hadn't changed too much. I think during the Obama administration, that was when it kind of started
Right.
to move towards the lower sugar content, lower sodium. I think what I saw, they were trying to get more salad into the schools, and I think that's happened. But some of the policies from that round were not implemented until just this last year or so, because COVID hit and there was all this disruption. So I think that 2015 guideline is only starting to be kind of really folded in now with the sugar and the sodium requirements. So it takes some time. I mean, I know some of the people were saying it looks like it might be expedited with the new guidelines, as far as, kind of almost flipping the script, flipping, protein on the top and carbs down at the bottom. But, that's going to be so challenging as far as supply chains and availability of proteins, cost of proteins. Everybody seems to want more protein now, and the cost goes up.
Yeah.
Beef supply, chicken, eggs, all that sort of thing. We kind of developed this whole agricultural system based on grinding grains into making processed foods. So if the shift is to get away from that, okay, that's going to take years for farmers to either shift to, more produce, more ranching, and still have those kind of commodity crops. But it's not a quick there's not a quick solution to that.
Right. Yeah,
And
it's all
usually
going to take.
all the cost kind of happens at the front end. It would be some time before the costs probably went down.
Yeah. And then even just where we're located in North Dakota, it's hard for us to grow produce year round. And so we have to truck in produce, and how's it going to, I don't know. It's such a complicated issue. I remember the days, again, making myself out to be the old lady, but I remember the days when I was just excited because it was pizza day at the cafeteria, you know?
Yep. No, they'll have to do a lot more canning and jarring of
Yeah.
pickling, and yeah. I don't
Really get back
I
to some of
don't know
those.
if the kids are going to eat that anyway. So
Uh,
that's one of the problems as well.
it is. What do kids actually eat?
Sauerkraut and ham pizza.
Not my kids. And that story once again was headlined New Food Guidelines Take a Bite Out of Public Schools. You can read that story on our website at newscoopnd.org or in one of our local newspaper partners. For the North Dakota News Cooperative, I'm Sabrina Halverson. This has been The Backstory.